Number 1. This happened years ago, so some parts of it are a bit foggy. I remember I was sleeping in my boyfriend's room and it was restless sleep, tossing and turning. At one point I woke up, at least I think I did, and I couldn't move. I had an overwhelming feeling of fear and anxiety. My boyfriend was sound asleep next to me and was facing away from me. I looked straight ahead and saw a dark figure crawl up the wall and onto the ceiling. It did not have distinguished features. I could only see that it walked on all its legs or arms like an animal. It also had a pyramid-shaped head. The whole time this was happening, I was trying so hard to scream and wake up my boyfriend, but I couldn't make any noise. I couldn't move my arms or legs to touch him to wake up. I was terrified. Eventually, the creature was right above my head, and that is all I remember. Does anyone else have a similar story or creature they have encountered during sleep paralysis? Number 2. I had my first and only sleep paralysis experience 2 weeks ago while traveling. I woke up in my hotel room laying on my back with my hands on my chest. I opened my eyes and realized that I could not move my mouth to speak or move my body. I figured it was sleep paralysis since I had read about it once. I observed a roughly 7-foot-tall shadow figure walking around my bed. Then it stopped on my right side to face me. The shadow disappeared. I then felt and heard a hot, wet, shallow, raspy breath on my left shoulder and neck. I could feel, but could not see, what I perceived to be an evil presence behind my left shoulder. I was not afraid at all. I actually welcomed the breathing for some odd reason. After about 3 minutes, the breathing stopped and I began moving my fingers. Then my entire body stopped being paralyzed. I immediately reached for my neck and shoulders to wipe off the breath. However, they were completely dry and my skin was a normal temperature. It felt extremely realistic, and I'm somewhat bothered by it now, although at the time I was too tired and not in the right mental state to care. Has anyone had similar experiences? Apparently visions like the Hat Man and incubi and succubi are quite common. I find this unnerving since it seems unlikely that people would independently have the same hallucinations. Number 3. The first time I ever had sleep paralysis, I was 13 years old. My family and I were camping. My parents stayed in this big canvas tent while my little sister and I stayed in a camping van. During the paralysis, I was exactly where we were in the van. My eyes were open, and I thought I slept in the same position for too long, causing my body to be sore. But it was really sleep paralysis. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I could only see out the window that was directly in front of my face. When I looked out the window, I saw a dark figure, lanky arms and legs. Looked like he hadn't eaten in an eternity. Son of a bitch was all bones. And he had this black, tattered, pinstriped suit. It looked like he ran it through a paper shredder. And he had on a top hat. I couldn't see much of his face, but I remember his face being long, abnormally long. I was screaming for help, but nothing was coming out. Or so I thought. My saving grace was my sister's hand on my shoulder, shaking me, desperately trying to wake me up. According to her, my eyes were open, wide open, and I was almost whining. She said I wouldn't take my eyes off the window, but that she couldn't see anything outside. I remember gathering as much strength as I could to say, "Can't move," to which my sister quickly acted and ran to get my parents in the tent next to us. Obviously, everything was okay afterwards. My sister said my face was pale, terrified. I finally came to, and when I was able to, I broke down into the biggest sob fest you could possibly imagine. Rightfully so. Fast forward to about an hour ago. I had another episode. I'm grown now at the age of 28. I'm living 2 hours away from the place I used to live, with my best friend. I've had a lot of shit going on in my life, so saying that I've been stressed is the biggest understatement of the century. I've not been sleeping as I should. I get a few hours a night. So I'm in bed, my eyes open, can't move. I didn't mean to fall asleep. And the only reason I say that is because my closet door was open, and I never leave it open as it gives me major anxiety. But tonight I didn't even think twice. That is, until I woke up. At the foot of my bed I saw my mother. She died about 6 years ago, but I quickly realized this thing was not my mom, because her face was gray, her cheeks were hollowed out, her eyes were just gone. I've seen her before as my sleep paralysis demon, but what she had is something I will never ever forget. In one of her hands was my nephew's stuffed animal that I got him for his very first birthday, only it was covered in blood. And I remember when I looked at her, she tilted her head to the side and just smiled. How do I go back to sleep after this? Number 4. This happened when I was 7 or 8, back in the 90s. I didn't have access to a TV, no internet. My brain was as pure as you can get. We had a nanny. Her name was Nancy. My parents would go out for dinner and leave my brother and me with her. We would hang out in the living room. All of a sudden, I see this shadow on the wall of the hallway that leads from the entrance to where I am. It was a man. He was wearing a long coat and a top hat. It scared me. I felt stuck, unable to move, and completely terrified. The thing is, when you are that young, you can't really tell a difference between sleep and wakefulness. What I experienced was real. There was no acknowledgement of the transition from dream to actual life. I was sure this experience was happening to me in the actual physical realm. I told my parents about this. I told my brother about this. He was so young, he took my words and made them his own. I convinced him that what I saw is what he saw. Imagine how sure you have to be of something so as to make someone believe they experienced it too. To this day, he still thinks he remembers. My parents thought Nancy, the nanny, snuck her boyfriend into the apartment, and they both pranked us. They fired her. I was so certain, I convinced my parents. 20 years later, I shared this with someone who immediately suggested, without flinching, that was sleep paralysis. He then proceeded to show me a documentary on the subject, and that's when I realized it was real after all. Number 5. This experience happened literally 2 days after I had to put my beloved childhood dog down. I never experienced sleep paralysis before, nor ever thought it was an actual thing. I have always kept an open mind about these kind of things, though. Speaking since my room used to be my sister's, and we've both experienced very odd things in the room and house. During this particular experience, I turned off my lamp and flopped down on my bed. I genuinely thought I was going to just pass out because of how exhausted I was, but I kept tossing and turning all throughout the night. I remember rolling over to face my wall, and right when I felt like I was actually about to drift off, I heard my dog whining at my door. Already disoriented and tired, I naturally went to get up to let her in. It was a routine when she was still here. As I was rolling back over, I ended up losing mobility as I was flat on my back. It didn't feel like I was being held down, as most people tend to mention. It felt like I just lost all control of my limbs and could only move my head. I continued to stare at my ceiling, and my lamp turned on, and I started to smell a very specific fragrance which I can't describe. All I can remember is how the whining kept getting louder, and when I looked over to the middle of my room, there was an extremely tall, white dog-like creature quite literally hanging from my ceiling, not standing. I distinctly remember right before I gained my ability to move again, it got closer to me and just stared. As I gained mobility, I sat upright, and my lamp was off, and my bedroom door was slightly open. Does anyone know what the dog could represent, or what sleep paralysis even means?